Hello and welcome to the Consistory video podcast produced by the Confessional Evangelical Lutheran Communion. I'm your host, Reverend Magnus Sørensen from the Augustana Evangelical Lutheran Church in Denmark and superintendent of the Kowalk International Province. Today's topic is church fellowship and especially as it relates to the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod and its sister churches, a majority of whom are members of the International Lutheran Council. This is not specifically about the LCMS, or it's not about the LCMS alone, but the LCMS and its sister churches and how they engage in triangular fellowship and why confessional Lutherans for that reason should leave the LCMS and its sister churches. Now we could call them ILC churches, but some of the ILC churches are not in fellowship with the LCMS. The ILC is not a fellowship, but many of the LCMS sister churches are members of the ILC. But we don't want to make this solely about the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, since it involves other churches in the ILC. Now, our starting point, I think, should be the brief statement of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, which says in paragraph 28 and 29 on church fellowship: since God ordained that His word only, without the admixture of human doctrine, be taught and believed in the Christian Church, 1 Peter 4:11, John 8:31 and 32, 1 Timothy 6:3 and 4, all Christians are required by God to discriminate between orthodox and heterodox church bodies, Matthew 7:15. To have church fellowship only with orthodox church bodies, and in case they have strayed into heterodox church bodies, to leave them, Romans 16:17. We repudiate unionism, that is, church fellowship with the adherents of false doctrine, as disobedience to God's command, as causing divisions in the church, Romans 16:17, 2 John 9 and 10, and involving the constant danger of losing the word of God entirely, 2 Timothy 2:17-21. And then paragraph 29. The orthodox character of a church is established not by its mere name nor by its outward acceptance of and subscription to an orthodox creed, but by the doctrine which is actually taught in its pulpits, in its theological seminaries, and in its publications. On the other hand, a church does not forfeit its orthodox character through the casual intrusion of errors, provided these are combated and eventually removed by means of doctrinal discipline. Acts 20:30 and 1 Timothy 1:3. Now, I agree completely with what is confessed here in the brief statement. It is the correct doctrine of church fellowship that is on paper of the LCMS, the one that they officially confess here in the brief statement, as well as in Walter's thesis on church and ministry, where the thesis on church fellowship is also correct. It confesses here that it is that it's repudiates unionism, that is church fellowship with the adherents of false doctrine, as disobedience to God's command. And this makes unionism itself one of those false doctrines that is the reason why one should not be in fellowship with a church body. That is, a church body that adheres to unionism is a heterodox church that one should reject. And for this reason, triangular fellowship is wrong. Triangular fellowship, that is the idea, that is fellowship with someone who is in fellowship with heterodox churches, because that church which is in fellowship with heterodox churches, by this fellowship, is a unionist church and therefore also a heterodox church. So this is not about being contaminated somehow by the fellowship of others. It is about the fact that those who are in fellowship with heterodox churches, by that fellowship, become heterodox themselves. And therefore, Orthodox Christians should not be in fellowship with them. Now, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod and its sister churches is in fellowship with heterodox churches. And some of these heterodox churches are heterodox because they are members of the Lutheran World Federation. And by their membership in the Lutheran World Federation, they do confess fellowship with heterodox churches in the Lutheran World Federation. Now, some will say that these churches are not really in fellowship with the Lutheran World Federation, but in the case of many of them, they are in fact in fellowship also in practice in altar and pulpit fellowship with those heterodox churches. And since the Lutheran World Federation itself claims to be a fellowship, they should withdraw if they are no longer in fellowship with those other churches. Now it is hard to figure out precisely who these churches are, and some have become members of the ILC and have become in fellowship with the LCMS. That might not be listed here, and some have perhaps left. But as far as I have, because it can change a bit, but I know that at least some of them I know are correct here. But the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Ghana is in a part of the Lutheran World Federation, and is also a full member of the International Lutheran Council, and is in fellowship with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. It is a partner church of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod according to the LCMS website. The India Evangelical Lutheran Church is a member of the LWF and is also in fellowship with the LCMS, and according to the ILC website, it's only an observer in the ILC. Then there is the Japan Lutheran Church, which is an associate member of the International Lutheran Council, and is not it has been in fellowship with the LCMS, but it seems like the LCMS is about to break fellowship with it. Then there is the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Kenya, which is a full member of the International Lutheran Council and in fellowship with the LCMS. Then there is the Lutheran Church in Korea, which is also a full member of the International Lutheran Council and in fellowship with the LCMS. And the Good News Lutheran Church in Papua New Guinea is also a full member of the International Lutheran Council and in fellowship with the LCMS. The Lutheran Church in the Philippines is also a member of the LWF and a full member of the ILC and in fellowship with the LCMS. And finally, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Ingria in Russia is also a full member of the ILC and a part of the Lutheran World Federation, and therefore in fellowship with other Lutheran World Federation churches. So there are quite a couple of churches that are both members of the ILC, in fellowship with the LCMS, and members of the LWF. There are others that have become members of the ILC that are not members of the LWF, but have some of the same issues with practicing church fellowship with the LWF. Now I should mention perhaps also the Latvian Evangelical Lutheran Church. It is not registered as member of the ILC, but I am on the first place I looked, but I'm pretty sure it has become a member of the ILC. At least it is in fellowship with the LCMS and a member of the Lutheran World Federation. And until recently also a member of the Leuenberg Fellowship, which is a fellowship of Lutheran and Reformed churches. So that was until, I think, last year it left the Leuenberg Fellowship, which is good that it did. But it was in fellowship with the LCMS already long before that, 10 years or more. So the LCMS had accepted fellowship with a church that is in fellowship with the Reformed churches. This is just one example of some of the problems that are a result of these triangular fellowships. Now, we could take one of these churches, the ELCK in Kenya, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Kenya, which is a member church of the LWF and also a member of the ILC and also in fellowship with the LCMS. Now, the Archbishop of the ELCK, he went to Sweden in 2005 and consecrated the first bishop of the Mission Province in Sweden, which was a group in the Church of Sweden that left, or they didn't really leave, they made their own diocese in the Church of Sweden, but in such a way that people were members both of their local parishes and of these. They didn't call them congregations, at least not to begin with, but koinonias. So they were really doing what the pietists were doing, that they were forming groups in the church. But then they started ordaining pastors of these groups without them having leaving their former pastors first. So this is a very problematic way of doing it from a Lutheran perspective, because one was really calling another pastor while still having a pastor. But they made this diocese in Sweden, and then they had Walter Barr from the LCK in Kenya coming to Sweden and consecrating the first bishop. Now this bishop, Archbishop O'Bara, he was also preaching at President Harrison's installation in 2010. Around the same time, he was in Denmark at a meeting where he also had a church service with the Danish State Church pastors, one fellowship with the Reformed through the Løgneberg Concord, and this service also included communion. Archbishop O'Bara from the ELCK was actually practicing fellowship with LWF churches while he was in fellowship with the LCMS. If we look at the church in Latvia, I already mentioned that it has been in fellowship with the Reformed churches through the Løgneberg Fellowship for around 2 decades, while also being in fellowship with the LCMS. And one can also find examples of it of the Archbishop of the Latvian Lutheran Church celebrating communion a few years ago with the female Archbishop of the International Latvian Church. So it is also in practice in fellowship with other LWF churches. Now it is also accepted a bishop from the ACNA Church, Anglican Church of North America, preaching in Latvia. So they have pulpit fellowship with the Anglican Church, or at least some Anglican churches. So the Lutheran Church in Latvia does practice unionism, and nevertheless the LCMS is in fellowship with it, just as it is with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Kenya. And therefore one should leave the LCMS if one is a member of the LCMS, and one should leave the churches that are in fellowship with the LCMS, or have one's church leave fellowship with the LCMS. Not only according to what I say, but according to the official doctrine of the LCMS itself, which is expressed in the brief statement. Because the brief statement says that one should discriminate between Orthodox and heterodox churches, and that unionism is disobedience to God's command, and therefore is also heterodoxy in itself. So a church that engages in unionism becomes heterodox. Those who engage in church fellowship with such a church also engaging in unionism, and thereby they become heterodox. So one should leave those who are in fellowship with heterodox churches, just as one should leave heterodox churches, because fellowship with heterodox churches is heterodoxy. Now, if you want answers to other questions, write to us at coelc@hotmail.com. And at hotmail.com. And we will continue this series on some of the issues with the ILC and the LCMS.